Yay! Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I have Cassandra here with me. She may be a familiar face to some of you, but we're going to give people a few, maybe about a minute or two to join. Yes, say hello in the chat. Tell us where you're from, share your LinkedIn information, all that fun stuff.
Sarah used to work with me. She's a mentor here. That's why I'm like, I see you, Sarah.
Hello. Amazing. We may have some mentors creeping around the chat. We definitely have students creeping around the chat, so that's amazing. For those of you who've been here before, you'll hear me say questions in the questions tab. Chat tab is for saying hello and sharing resources and all that fun stuff and just chatting with each other. Oh, wow. Paula, you're from London. Hello. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. Oh, hello. Carolina. Hopefully I'm saying your name right. San Diego. I'm in San Diego as well. It is a hot day here today. We're experiencing very dry weather, so we're under fire watch, actually.
Oh, that's great. I don't have to worry about that, thankfully. It just snows.
Different.
Oh, wow, Ottawa. We got some Canadians. We got like 3 Canadians at least.
Nice.
Nigeria.
Oh, Nigeria. Thank you for being with us. Oh, so fun.
Toronto.
There's someone from Spain, Montreal, Portugal. Wow, everyone came through today. This is so cool. All right, cool. So we're going to get started. Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Emily. I'm the community manager and student for Designlab. If you're a student in UX Academy Foundations, you very well have seen my name across Slack, hopefully. Today with me, I have Cassandra Cappello. She's one of our mentors. She's someone's mentor. We have Steph saying she's in the chat right now. So we definitely have a hype for Cassandra today.
Yeah, there's a few of my students in here. Yeah, damn, all of you. Wow.
Nice. Now, today's going to be pretty casual, like any of our other Q&A. We're going to kick it off with some questions that I have written down, and then based off of things that anyone thinks of, feel free to pop your questions in the questions tab on the right-hand side. And for anyone who does have questions, go through the questions list, see if there's anything that someone's may have asked already. Upvote the questions, kind of the order in which to answer them. But we're going to get started. So I'm going to let Cassandra introduce herself for a little bit, and then we'll kick it off with questions, and then we'll head over to Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, so a little bit about me. I'll give like the usual spiel that I give to all my students. So I have been a product designer for 7 years. I basically discovered graphic design because product design didn't exist when I was this young. When I was 14, discovered graphic design, and I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. So I did it. Very direct course. I got my bachelor's in design, and I've been working as a product designer ever since. So yeah, I've worked at a few different agencies in Toronto, a couple tech companies in Toronto, which we can talk about if anybody wants to. And I have also run my own business for 9 years, which sounds really weird to say. Like, we're getting toward 10 and it's starting to sound really strange. So yeah, that's kind of been what I've been doing for the last like 9 years, I guess.
Well, it definitely seems like the transition that you made was, it was kind of meant to be. So that's, but I guess like we definitely have students that come from a graphic design background. So I guess from your experience, what was that transition like from graphic design to UX? Like, how did you discover UX? What intrigued you about it? And like, did it seem like a natural fit for you moving forward?
Okay, yeah. So when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was at York University, if you're in Toronto, yeah. So it's a graphic design degree where you just learn everything. Like, I can make you a book, I can make you a magazine, I can make you a logo, whatever, right? And I learned all that, and I still like all that, but I discovered, I guess, UX design and UI design as a whole, and that was something that I was super interested in. At the time, people were not super interested in it. Like, at least in my program, they were like not into it, and they were just like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. But I liked it. I made my thesis UX based. So because I was doing all that UX work while I was in school, I think that's just like what I got hired to do. I wasn't even trying to be strategic about it. Like, realistically, I was like 21. I was not trying to do anything in particular, but I liked UX. I liked the logic, the creativity. I like that you can back up your decisions a little bit more than you can in graphic design as a whole. So that's kind of what drew me to it. And yeah, I just honestly, I was lucky and I got my first job like really soon after graduating, and it just happened to be like a UI UX designer. And that's what I continue to do, which has led me to a good place, but I wasn't really thinking of that at the time.
What was the role called, like UX UI designer at the time, or was it kind of called something else? I know we still live in a really ambiguous world of titles right now, but
yeah, it was UI UX designer. Product designer was not a thing yet, I don't think, at least not in the world that I lived in. But yeah, people were like UI designer, UX designer, UI UX designer, interaction designer. I've been an interaction designer, interface designer. Like there was a bunch of different titles, but they were all kind of more or less a product designer.
I guess based on the progression of titles, are you seeing more of like a clear kind of like divide or path for people who are like, I want to be an interaction designer? Or do you think that just companies and not really knowing or understanding how to define the actual roles?
I think they just didn't know how to define it for the most part. Now I am seeing more concrete roles, I guess. Like more people are product designers and they're used to like being called product designers, and people kind of know what that is. But I think at the time they just like didn't know what to call you. So they just like made stuff up. Sometimes it wasn't even representative of what you did. Cause like, for example, like if you're a UI designer now, like I would assume that you solely do UI, but that wasn't the case at the time. They just kind of like gave you a title and they were like, I guess that's what you do, even though you do other things. So yeah, but I see it's kind of being streamlined a bit more.
Have any of your students asked you what this is between being called a UX designer versus being called a product designer?
Yeah, people have asked me that. So in some instances, they are the same. If I had to get technical about it, I would say that if you're strictly a UX designer or even a UX UI designer, this is kind of the design process that happens in the product life cycle that happens. So number one, there's research that's done on the problem, right? And that could be done by a UX researcher, that could be done by a designer, it really depends. And then you go into like, your flows, your wireframes, things like that. That's strictly what a UX designer usually did. And that's sometimes what that job is referring to. And then you go into the UI portion as well. So then you have, that's basically like the wireframes and the UI and stuff, such is what a UI UX designer technically would do if the title was accurate, which sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But then there's also like handing it off to development, working with the developers to get it done, QAing it, coming up with success metrics at the end of your project with your PM to like gauge if this was a success or not. A product designer does all those things, like everything I just described, you're there throughout the entire process. So that's technically the difference. That's not always accurate. Like sometimes you're a UI UX designer and you are doing all those things, but like that's technically what the difference would be.
Got it. Well, hopefully that provided some clarity for our students who are aspiring designers. But want to go back to, I guess, your experience was, I guess, or what was the best part of being a product designer, but then also like the best part of having transitioned from graphic design to being a product designer?
Yeah, I think the best part about being a product designer, I like the problems that I solve. So like if you don't like that, then obviously you wouldn't like being a product designer, but I like the problems that I'm solving. I think like I can kind of connect like more real world how I'm helping someone, and I can speak to people and interview people for research purposes to kind of see how I'm affecting them negatively or positively. I've definitely done both. And so I do like that about being a product designer. Whereas with graphic design, I feel like you usually just put it out there and like you hope people like it, but you don't really get any feedback. So like you hope that it's good and you're happy with it, I guess. And I guess there's just not that feedback loop that there is with being a product designer. But I do still like graphic design. Like obviously it's my first love, so I'm okay with doing all that still, but maybe not for my career, right?
Yeah, no, totally. I guess related to that last answer though, would you say that not having like a feedback loop or just not really getting any feedback in general was probably one of the most challenging parts of being a graphic designer, even leading a product designer?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say even early on in my career as a product designer, it was still like people weren't as open as they are now. Like now it's like everyone has a mentor or everyone is a mentor and everyone is trying to help everyone. And like there's so many articles out there on people's experiences with interviewing or, whiteboarding or whatever it is that you want to know. Like all that stuff exists out there. And people freely share that information. Not that people did not freely share information in graphic design. I feel like they still do, but it's not to the same extent. And I definitely don't think like I had that help when I was starting my career. There was no feedback, like period, basically. Like you just kind of like hope that you were doing a good job. So yeah, I definitely think that what's a hard part of being a graphic designer, unless you were in school, you're getting feedback in school. That's kind of a different situation, but in the working world.
Yeah, for sure. I guess related to your answer about, how it seems like today a lot of aspiring designers do have mentorship in some way. Do you think that that was a factor that led you to wanting to become a mentor?
Oh yeah, 100%. Okay, so I'm gonna tell a story. Sarah, who's here, is in the story, so I hope she feels loved. So I'm going to tell a little bit of a roundabout story. Everyone stick with me, basically. So a few months into working at TouchBistro, this was over 3 years ago, we hired a product design intern. Her name is Emily. And now she's an intermediate product designer at TouchBistro, but Emily's there. Okay, me. Okay, so yeah, we hired a product designer. Her name was Emily. And we were reporting into the VP of product. We didn't have a design manager. Like it was just kind of like 3 or 4 designers and we were just kind of floating there. And obviously as someone who just graduated, that's not the best environment for her to be in. So I kind of took on a little bit of a mentorship role, whether she liked it or not. I feel like I kind of forced it on her. And I just wanted to give her a little bit of guidance, or like, if she felt like she wanted to know something or like she needed help with something, that she can ask me, because I did not receive that guidance when I was starting my career at all. And I feel like it does hinder you. So I didn't want her to feel like that, number one. And then number two, then we hired Sarah soon after, and I kind of did the same with her, forced it on her as well. Maybe I asked her, actually, I'm not sure. Maybe I didn't force it as much on Sarah. So we hired her. I was also a mentor to Sarah while she worked at TouchBistro, and I kind of found that the two of them were both very different. They have different personalities, and the things we were talking about were different. The way they want to receive information is different. Like different people are different is basically what I was finding. And I wanted to experience that with more people. So I basically went on Google, my favorite tool in the world. I'm an expert Googler, and I found Designlab, and it seemed very in line with what I wanted. Like there's like a syllabus to back it up. I don't have to make a syllabus or like teach people from scratch per se, because I'm like, I don't know if I should be doing that, like legally, maybe not. So I found that Designlab was a good experience where it's like, we have something to talk about. We can also talk about other things. And I'm taking on more of like a mentorship and coaching position for people. And I get to meet lots of strangers essentially and adapt to that, because I also think selfishly, it makes you a better designer. And a better person to work with when you have the ability to mentor other people and like adapt to other people. So part of it was selfish, part of it was for Emily. That's the sum up of the story.
I feel like your story aligns with so many other mentor stories where like we just feel like we were lacking something in our own journeys, that we just feel like we want to be able to give back and kind of like prevent or maybe help people who are trying to get into this career. That's definitely why I became a mentor as well. So I love hearing that. But I guess that also transitions us really nicely into our next kind of question or topic. What are your biggest takeaways or learnings from having been a mentor for a while already?
Oh man, biggest takeaways and learnings. I mean, yeah, the first one that I learned was, different people are different. Which I didn't realize how different everyone was. And that you really have to adapt to their personality. And I think that kind of changed I don't want to say my style of mentoring. I don't know how to like define my own style of mentoring. That's kind of hard when it's you, but it kind of changes your style of mentoring in the sense that like I need to adapt to, I don't know, so-and-so because they want really direct feedback, but then this other person maybe doesn't. Someone's a little more anxious than someone else. Like, how do you deal with that? I'm saying deal with that like it's a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I like everyone. But yeah, so that's kind of, I guess those are the challenges, like adapting to different people. You're learning about different people. They're a stranger and you're trying to learn about like, why did you get into design? And like, how are you as a person? What do you want in your life? What are your goals? How do I help you meet those goals, essentially? So yeah, it's very kind of like, I guess you're kind of context switching, but like not quite. It's different context because it's a different person.
Yeah, no, for sure. So we actually get a question from a lot of our students, especially when they're first starting with UX Academy. You know, they're always unsure of like, am I gonna like match well with my mentor? Am I gonna get along with them? Are we gonna
Yeah.
work well together? Based off of your experience, how long on average does it take for you to really kind of like sync up with a student in terms of like finding your own cadence and your flow together?
I feel like it depends on the person. Like there's some people who are my students that I speak to after, right? Like we almost became friends just because maybe our personalities are similar or whatever. So I think that that's a part of it. Like it's just your personality. So some people you get along like straight away, like after your first session or two, like you kind of have that cadence going already because you're on the same wavelength. Some people you're not because you are not the exact same person, which is also fine. I still like those people. But I usually think it takes, yeah, maybe like 2 to 3 sessions usually to kind of find that cadence. Cause it's like, now I kind of like, I guess I've met you a few times. I can kind of see a pattern of what you're like. You've met me a few times. You can see what I'm like. You know, like how I give feedback. I kind of know how you want to receive feedback at this point. So I feel like, yeah, usually first like 2 to 3 sessions is probably the universal answer.
During your first session, a lot of our students are always, you know, when they start, they're like, I don't really have anything to talk about. I haven't done any work yet.
Yeah.
So what is your advice for students when they are hopping into maybe one of their first sessions with their mentors? Like how to set expectations? Like what do you typically like to hear from them when you're matched up with a new student?
Okay, I always have like questions prepared so we have something to talk about. So number one, an intro to who I am, like, am I what you're looking for even? Because sometimes people are looking for someone very specific, like maybe they wanted someone with like a certain industry experience. Maybe I don't have that. I just want to be upfront about like who I am, what my experience is thus far. I want to know about them, like just as a person, their like how they got into design, how did they find design, what's their goal with UX Academy or Foundations, whatever it is that I'm mentoring for. Like, are you just trying to see if you like product design or are you sure that you like it and like you're making a career switch? Do you want to be a specific kind of designer, a generalist? Like what's going on basically? I want to kind of know what their goals are and like why they're here essentially. And from those questions, I usually find that we just kind of start talking. Like when someone tells you a little bit about themselves, there's more questions because you don't know them. So that usually, you know, takes up a session. So that's usually how I do it. I don't think that people have to come to the first session with anything specific. Like for the first session, it's not like you have to come like with questions about the syllabus or about the work that you haven't done yet or something. Like you don't have to do that. You can if you want. But yeah, usually come prepared to like talk about what your end goal is here and like why you're doing this, and just to have that discussion. And yeah, that's basically all I'd be looking for at first.
So you mentioned, you know, and I've definitely heard this as well, certain students, you know, maybe looking for someone who comes from a specific industry or maybe has worked in a specific industry. In your experience, do you think that matters a lot, especially when someone is just starting out? Like if we think about phase one and how it's very much foundational building in UXA, do you think industry matters?
Not necessarily. Like I don't think it's gonna like make or break you. I think it depends on how you use that time. Like, are you using that time to like only talk about, you know, the first like e-commerce based project in phase one? Are you talking about that? Or are you asking them about their time in the industry and like asking them about how they got into this industry or like something like that? I think if your mentor is like, for example, I don't know if this student's here, so like, sorry if I'm telling your story, but like she was a fashion designer and she wanted to work in the e-commerce space as a product designer because she used to be a fashion designer. So that kind of lines up. So I think she was hoping to find someone with that. I don't know if she did, she might have, but I'm just saying she was hoping to find someone with that experience. It all depends on how you spend that time with that person. Like you could get a lot of information from them about their career during that time, and that could be totally useful. But it might not, depending on how you spent your time. So I don't think it's like necessary. I don't think nothing bad is going to happen if like you don't get that perfect person. I don't think necessarily, but it could help. It could be helpful depending on how you spend your time.
This may be more of an opinion question, but what about students who may have concerns about a mentor who maybe doesn't check the box in terms of years of experience? Like maybe there's someone who's looking for like 10 plus years, but you know, maybe the mentor has like 5. Like advice or kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it depends because there's lots of like, I think there's a threshold for sure, in the sense that, like, if you had like 2 years of experience, which I know the mentors don't here, I'm just saying, like, if you had 2 years of experience, there's only so much you can experience in 2 years. But there's lots of designers who have like 5 or 6 years of experience who are better than designers that I've met that have 10 plus years experience. It kind of depends on the person. So I think, like, my advice would be, like, stalk their portfolio, stalk their LinkedIn, like, see how good their work is. And then once you get to know them, you know, kind of see like what their personality is like, what kind of experiences they've had. Cause I think it really depends. Like, it's kind of like, it's the same as an interview process, right? Like, when someone's interviewing you, you apply, you give them your resume, you give them your portfolio, you look at that and you're like, are they good? Okay, cool. Now we're going to talk to them for an hour, half an hour, whatever the situation is, and see if they're crazy or not. That's really what they're trying to do in the interview, right? Are you crazy? Do we like align in some way? If we do, then I don't think there's a problem. But yeah, kind of think about it, I guess, like an interview.
So my last question is actually related to Diane's question in the chat. And her question is, how would you get started in the industry if you have zero background in design? And that leads to my question, where it's basically, what advice do you have for people who are switching into UX design? Tips or things that they should, you know, maybe keep an eye or ear out for?
Okay. I would say, so I work with someone who just like graduated high school and like started designing, and he's like a great designer. That is rare. I want to make that very clear. I don't know how he did it, so I wouldn't like assume that that is the best path for everyone. I would say the best path for people, if you don't have any background in design, is to get some sort of education. Whether that is through a boot camp, whether that's through going to college, whatever that is for you, because everyone's in a different situation. I think things work differently for everyone. So getting some kind of education to start in the industry, I think, is number one, because there's just some things that like you can't possibly know if someone didn't tell you. Like, they don't exist out there on the internet. You wouldn't think to look for it. So someone has to tell you, a teacher of some kind. I guess in terms of what would I recommend, I would recommend that you look to, like, a lot of people look to what other students are doing, which is not a bad thing. I think that's great. Still do that. But look to what professionals are doing, because that's really where you want to end up. Like, you're competing with those professionals who have years of experience as well. You're going to be competing with them for jobs to some degree. So I would want you to look at them and see what they're doing and try to be as good as them, essentially. Like, don't just look at your peer group around you and try to be as good as them, because that doesn't set you apart. Like, you want to set yourself apart and you want to be amazing in something, right? Whatever that is for you. So yeah, education, try to set yourself apart. I don't know what else I would say. I feel like there's a lot of things you can do. I guess you could also, like, speak to people, get a mentor, network. I hate networking. I'm like really an introvert, but yeah, networking helps. Getting people's opinions. People love talking about themselves. That's why I'm here, apparently, right? So if you get people talking about themselves and you network that way, and it's very organic, I think that can be useful, and those people will help you once you're looking for a job.
So I'm sure you know, right, like I just mentioned, so many of our students are career switchers. And when we get to the very beginning portion of phase 2, where we're asking them to craft their story, often that I found that with my students, they have a hard time making that connection from their past experience to, you know, them calling themselves UX designers. So how do you kind of advise people, like, when they're thinking about their story, like, what do you kind of say to your students, like, this is what you should think of when you're trying to make those connections?
Okay, in terms of their past experience to now?
Yes.
Okay. So we usually have this discussion, or they usually ask, I feel. So depending on what your previous experience was, it's going to be a little bit of a different story. Like, if you have a graphic design background, those skills are a little more directly related. Like, it's not as hard to match those up. For example, I have a student who is in sales. He might be here too. So I have a student who's in sales, and he's like, how do my skills in sales really match up to a real working designer? I'm like, they actually match up a lot. You wouldn't think that, because designers aren't always good at selling, but like, you technically do have to be good, because you're constantly selling your work. You're convincing your stakeholders, you know, your product manager, your developers, other designers, whatever, that what you did is a good idea, right? So you have to sell that in a way. Like part of that is research and like backing up your points, but part of that is also how you say it and just the fact that you are selling it. You are selling yourself in an interview, right? In an interview, the part of the interview that I personally struggle with the most, and I think a lot of people do, is that you're selling yourself, which I'm like kind of okay with, but you have to sell yourself to the point that they think that there is no one better for this job. It's you or bust, right? Like that's what you want the employer to think, which I think is innately untrue technically, but you have to make them think it anyway. So those sales skills and like that confidence that you have to have when speaking to someone when you're selling, period, like that does actually come into your daily life, for example. I mean, I'm speaking about a very specific example, but yeah.
I feel like that's definitely what my mentor told me when I was a student. He basically was just like, you have to fake it till you make it. You fake it so much that you start to believe it yourself. And that once you start selling yourself like over and over again, you become more convinced that like, I am great for this job, you know, like I can do this. Do you think that also plays like a key factor in maybe like someone getting hired?
I think so. I think people can sense desperation. Like as humans, we know when someone's desperate. It's like when you're out on a date, you're like, this person's desperate and I'm not feeling it, right? I've been with my boyfriend for 9 years, so that's not my personal story, by the way. But yeah, so don't be desperate. I think people can sense that. Like they sense confidence, but also one person's actually pointing out, like you can't be overconfident and like oversell yourself to the point where it's clearly fake, which I've also seen people do. I've seen people like write things in their resume and on their portfolio and talk about things in presentations where I'm like, you did not do that. I used to work there and I know you didn't do that. I know that's not what the job is, right? So some people, yeah, they oversell it. You don't want to seem, I think desperation can cause overselling. So you want to have like a little bit of a quiet confidence, right? Like you want to be like, yeah, I'm good for this job, but I don't need you kind of thing.
Everyone needs to convince themselves that you are worth it and that you are absolutely worth someone's role out there. And I feel like a lot of it is also on us as candidates, right? To have to also feel it out, you know, get a sense for like what the team could be, the culture could be, because it could very well play into.
Ask questions. Ask them questions, because as much as they're interviewing you, you're interviewing them. And I think this applies to like a lot of areas of life where people just feel like they don't have the power in that area. Like they feel like they don't have control, but I'm like, you actually do. You have way more control than you think that you do. So if you just start acting like you do, I think you'll realize that like things start to happen and it wasn't as bad as you thought it was going to be.
Totally. Okay, so we're going to switch over to the questions tab and we're going to go in order of upvotes. So everyone, if you do have questions, please dump them in the questions tab and we'll get through as many of them as possible in the next 20 minutes. So
there's a lot. Damn.
Yeah, there's a lot. That's why I was like, don't worry, we're going to have all the questions.
Okay.
So the first one, I guess it's competing between Alicia's question and Joanne. So we'll go with Alicia's first. How do you feel about UX Academy? Like, would you say that in terms of the curriculum itself, do you feel like students can come out with practical skills, to be able to land a job? Like, what's your take on that as a mentor?
Yeah. Okay. So overall, like if I had to compare against like other boot camps that I'd looked into, I chose to mentor here for a reason. Like I don't want to mentor somewhere that I think is shit, frankly. Right. So it's like, I do think that Designlab equips people as well as they can within the short time span that you have to do Designlab. Right. And I also appreciate that Designlab is constantly asking for feedback and constantly changing their curriculum, essentially. I don't think the students see this, but the mentors will see this in the back end. They have like freaking 5 versions of foundations and like they're constantly working on that and trying to make it better. And it does change pretty frequently. So I appreciate that. But I also think that, and I've told my students this, like part of it is up to you. Like there is the school you go to, the curriculum you learn, the teacher you have, and that is all relevant, but it's also you, right? Like, do you put in the effort? Do you go, usually I'd say even in most schools, like even if you go to college, like you have to go above and beyond the curriculum to be like particularly employable and not have a hard time, right? So I think that's part of it. Just like how far are you willing to go within reason, obviously. And how seriously did you take it? Because there's also some people that I feel like most people I meet, like 99% of people I meet do take it very seriously, which I was surprised at. I thought that number would be lower. But some people don't take it as seriously. And then they're like, why didn't I get a job? Well, because you didn't take it that seriously. So yeah, overall, I think it depends on like who you are, where you're starting from. But yeah, my overall answer is yes.
I think that actually leads into Joanne's question really nicely. What are some of the biggest struggles you see that your students face in UXA or career services?
Yeah, hello, Joanne. I miss you. She was also a student. Biggest struggles in UXA and career services, I would say most of them are emotional, to be honest. It's not even like there's lots of people who are technically very good. A lot of it is like confidence, anxiety around not finding a job. So I usually find that it's that, and to a degree that can get in the way of some people doing well if you take it too far. Like, I mean, anxiety and questioning yourself like are there for a reason. They're there for you to like notice when things are wrong and to improve. But if you take it too far and it's never good enough, then it really never will be good enough and you kind of won't really move anywhere. So that's kind of something that I found, like people who are particularly anxious, who have like a lot of anxiety around like finding a job, which everyone does, but like when you're going really anxious here, those people usually take longer to find a job than everyone else. Partially because I think they're sensing the desperation, number one. And then number two, I think they don't feel like they're worthy of whatever they're doing and they're acting like it, right? So I think a lot of it is emotional. It's not even like technical problems.
Yeah, for sure. And I think imposter syndrome is something that all of our students go through. I tell them, I think that, people who have been designers for years and years and years still feel that way, especially if you do come at it from a very, humble standpoint, like admitting that you don't know everything, no matter how many years of experience you have. But, with students that you've had, I'm sure you've experienced them kind of facing the same imposter syndrome. Like what's your advice for them?
My advice, number one, I tell them, like I encourage them and I tell them that they are not as bad as they think they are. So hopefully, I don't know if it coming from another person matters. I try to put the situation into perspective as well. Cause usually I'm like, I don't know, some people are like, I haven't found a job in like 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, you need to calm down. It's been 2 weeks. Like, putting into perspective how long that actually takes. And I think also like, yeah, part of it is I'm like, speak to other people and kind of have them talk you down from this ledge a little bit. Have them put into perspective what the reality of, looking for a job or like learning a new skill or whatever it is. Because those things are scary in a way, right? Like you took a leap of faith here. And everyone knows that you did, but it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. Like it doesn't mean it's going to be rainbows and roses and whatever either, but I think part of it is just logically telling yourself that it's gonna be okay, or getting someone to tell you that if you can't tell yourself that. I don't think there's a ton to it. But yeah, also I feel like imposter syndrome, especially like if you're a woman or you're a person of color in tech as well, I think that there's a lot of people feel imposter syndrome as a whole, but I think those groups feel imposter syndrome more. Because they feel like, they don't belong, or people make them feel like they don't belong. So I think part of it is also just treating people like they deserve to be there, period.
Yeah, totally. And I think along those lines, do you think that a personal mindset also kind of plays into that imposter syndrome kind of factor? So for me personally, I switched my mindset when I started applying for design jobs into like every no that I heard back from a job or an application and it was a no, but I kind of told myself like, hey, like at least they responded, because I think the worst response is no response. So, and I think like that's what I tell my students, like, even if you get a no, that does still mean that there was something about your application or your portfolio that did catch their eye in that moment. Yeah. So would you agree?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think like there's also more people becoming product designers and it becomes more competitive as time goes on. But that it's okay if you get a no, right? Like it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. it usually is for a reason. Like maybe you should not have worked there and you just didn't realize it. I think also for me personally, I try to look back on my experience and all my rejections, which I've had many. And I think of all the things that I've learned from those rejections and how it got me to where I am, which is hard to do in the moment. You really got to like, experience it for 6 months and then look back long term, or else you're not going to see it.
Absolutely. Okay, so I guess kind of on the same vein of this conversation, Kevin's asking, how would you frame a fictional project like the ones that we have our students work on in capstones? Or what's your advice for how to talk about them?
Okay, number one, I wouldn't pretend that it's not fictional. Like some people lie, and I'm like, I know you're lying. Like as someone who's hiring people, like you can tell. Just don't lie. That's number one. You're a student. I expect your project to be fictional. So don't worry too much about it. Just frame it as if you were a professional. I'll kind of explain how to do that vaguely in the limited amount of time that I have. So it's like, for example, having a problem statement. What is the problem? Explaining the challenge as a real world business challenge. Like, don't be like, for example, don't say like, oh, I wanted to make this app because like, I don't know, the UX of other apps in this area are bad. That's not a real business problem, right? Like that could be part of it, but there's also another problem. Like, why do users need this app? What is different about it? Why does a business need you to make this? They're going to make money off of it. How, right? Like frame it in a real world setting, even though it's fake, and that's fine. And then also, all of the students do this, I feel like going through the proper design process, which you all do. So I don't think there's a problem with that. And then I think another thing is to take user feedback into account a lot. And then also defining like outcomes. I feel like that's something that I struggled with, especially early on in my career. Like, how do you define the outcome of this project? Like, how is the outcome good? How is it bad? Like, how did you define that through the user testing? So having like a clear outcome at the end in at least one area. Like, for example, I could say like, oh, I made this application and it reduced support calls by 50%. Obviously, you can't say something that specific, but like you kind of get the idea. And then also, I think it's important to be reflective when you're presenting your case study or in your portfolio, in written form as well. Companies know, like we are designers too. Like the people interviewing you are designers. We've created lots of bad shit in our lives. We know that, right? Like we know you created some bad shit. We did too. It's fine. Right? We get it. We know there's situations that occur. So we know that the design process is not always perfect. Like it's not linear. It doesn't always work out how we want it to work out. It doesn't always come out as the final product we envisioned at the beginning, which is fine. You can say that. Like people want to see that you had issues and how you handled them and that you persevered and what you learned from them and what you're going to do next. Right. So I think that's really important. And a lot of people try to like seem perfect, but it seems fake. People don't like that. They want you to seem real and imperfect.
That is amazing advice that I may steal for my own students. So that is awesome. Okay, so the next question is from Yu Chen, and this is just more your opinion on what do you think a general career path is for someone who's just starting out. And let's say they finish a boot camp. Do they typically start as an intern? Do they typically start as a junior? What have you seen?
From my students, usually people start as a junior designer. I would say there's, I don't know, like if I had to give you like a percentage, I would say like maybe like 40% get like an internship or a contract role or something like that. And then 60% get like a full-time junior position. That's my experience. I don't know if everyone has that experience. And honestly, that has nothing to do with me being like a good coach or anything. It's them, it's not me. If they're successful, it's them.
I guess related to your response, how do you typically, or have you had questions from your students about like, should I wait for the perfect full-time job, or should I maybe kind of entertain a contract job that kind of comes through my inbox? Because obviously there's pros and cons, right? Contracts aren't guaranteed, time length, all that stuff. But what is your typical advice around that?
Yeah, it really depends on the person I'm speaking to. So I've had students be in that position and it's like you don't have a job and you need one, and I'm like, take it, right? Because you do need to live at the end of the day. That is a reality. So if that's your situation, like as long as they're not abusing you or doing something illegal and like everything's fine, take the job, it's okay. you work there for a period of time, you get some experience, you leave. We all do that. It's fine. Some students have a full-time job in whatever they were doing before, and they don't want to like just take whatever is offered to them initially. They want to wait for a full-time position because it's like, you know, I already get benefits now. I have the opportunity to wait a little bit longer and still be okay in my life. And I'm like, that's fine, right? Like, as long as you're not waiting for the perfect job for like years or something, it's fine. I've had students do both and it works out well for both of them. It just depends on your situation.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me in particular, I was one of those students who had a full-time job during UXA, and I was lucky enough to be able to kind of take that leap of faith and take a contract job. And I will say that that was probably the best experience of my life, because contract jobs don't put you through all the onboarding that a new company would if you were hired as a full-time employee. So I feel like you get that kind of hands-on experience almost right away with contract positions versus like going into a full-time job.
Yeah. So yeah, depends on the person. Sorry. I know that's like the most annoying answer.
Okay. This one's from Nicole. So also another personal opinion question. Do you feel like the UX UI market is oversaturated right now?
I wouldn't say oversaturated. I'd say it's definitely. So when I became a designer, it was like way easier. Like, I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not going to suffer the way that you guys are going to suffer in terms of like looking for a job. It is harder now. There are more people that are product designers. There's still a ton of jobs. I still think that there's a ton of jobs compared to the amount of people. So I don't feel like it's oversaturated and that you should like give up or anything. I think like the ratio is still okay. I think where it becomes difficult is that a lot more is expected of you, right? Like, I don't know, like, I'm sure you all have this experience. Like, if you look back on like kids in high school, if you're an adult now, you're like, wow, they're so much better and smarter than we were. And they do so much more work, and like, they're so much better at whatever it is that they're doing. And I think the same thing about university. Like, I look back on, for example, there's a junior designer who works at TouchBistro, and she went to YSDN. I think there's someone from YSDN here too. And I went to that program too. And I'm like, yeah, you're so much better than I was at your age, but that's what's required, right? Like, more is required of you, and you have to be better earlier. So I think that is the toughest part, that you have to be like amazing right out the gate. As time goes on, it just gets more and more so.
So I guess related to that response, how, I guess, even in your own experience, how have you kind of like dealt with positions that essentially are asking for like the unicorn? So it's even beyond just being a product designer. They're asking you for HTML, CSS, like that kind of experience. Like, number one, do you think it's okay? Like, do you think that that's okay for a company to ask? Or, you know, like, how do you kind of like advise your students to like do their research on job positions?
Yeah, I would say that's not okay. Like, if it's going beyond the realm of a product designer, I honestly just think you're cheap, frankly. Like, I think that they are cheap. I think that they maybe don't know what a designer does. I think maybe they don't have other designers, and they've never worked with designers. That's what I would assume when I see something that's going beyond the realm of product design even. So I would tell a student that, like, if you're willing to deal with that, then that's okay, right? Like, as long as the experience is good enough. But you will experience working with people who don't know what you do, don't understand what you do. You will have to explain it to them. You will have to teach them what design is. You will have to verbalize how you got to every conclusion over and over again, which to a degree is part of every design job, like to a lesser degree, hopefully. But you will have to do that a lot. Are you okay with doing that? Right? So it kind of depends on the person, their situation. But yeah, it depends on if you're okay with doing that. But I would not stay in that role forever. Like, basically what I tell people is, I'm like, don't get stuck in roles, essentially. Like, if you're in a job that you think is like mediocre, but you're like, I wasn't getting any other jobs, so I took this one, that's fine. Lots of people have been there. You're not the only one. That's fine. Work there for a year and leave, right? Just make sure you do the leaving part. Like, a lot of people get comfortable and they don't leave, and then they've worked there for 5 years, and that's the experience they have. And then only other companies like that will want to hire them because that's the experience they have. So it's fine if you have that experience for a short period of time. Just make sure you leave.
How do you answer when your students go, should I learn HTML and CSS?
I say you don't you don't have to know it like to the degree that a developer knows it by any means. But I think you should know it on a basic level. Like you should understand it, right? Like you should understand what is possible programmatically, just in case you're designing something and your developers are like, that's not possible. Like you don't want every single thing you design to be not possible because you have no idea how things work, right? So you want to make sure what you're designing is possible. And number two, you want to understand how to speak to developers. Like for example, as a designer, if I'm talking about line height, I think leading, right? That's the design term, leading. And that's what I say in my head. But when I'm speaking to a developer, I don't say that, right? I'm like line height, border radius, blah, blah, blah. Like I'm using CSS terms so that they know what I'm talking about. So you want to make sure that you're communicating in their language. And also you want to make sure that they don't, this has happened to me many times, that they don't tell you that something is impossible and you don't know enough to know better because they're lying, right? Which usually doesn't happen, but some people do that. I don't know why they do it, but yeah, that's happened where they're like, oh, that's not possible. And I'm like, yes, it is. Do it, right? So I think you should know it at least to that degree.
Yeah, no, I definitely fall in the realm of like being a designer who wants to have a really great relationship with my developers. And like, I'm not trying to make their life difficult, but I also understand that we have a product to build. We have, you know, we have users to kind of please, but yeah, I 100% agree with that. Mm-hmm. All right, so switching gears a little bit, Stephanie's asking, in terms of freelancing, advice on how to get clients if you're starting to freelance.
Yeah, okay. I also noticed Minnie is here who works with me. Hi, Minnie. Okay, that's fucking wild. Didn't know you were going to be here. Okay, so getting freelance clients. Okay, I'm like, I honestly don't think I'm the best at this. So I feel like a lot of it for me is luck. So basically, I'll kind of tell you my like freelance experience. So I couldn't get like a regular job at the mall and shit when I was 19. So I was like, oh, well, I'm a designer. So like, I'll just like start freelancing. And that's where my business started. It grew into something that is now a real sustainable business, but that's where it began. So I just like found like a job ad for like a contract, like on the internet. I don't even remember where it was. I don't think it was like Craigslist. It wasn't like Craigslist bad, but I just like found something, right? And I started working with them. I had my portfolio up as well at this point, and I think that people just like found me. I just made sure that I'm findable, right? Like I'm on Dribbble, I'm on Behance. People message me there for work. I have my portfolio up. People will message me through my portfolio contact form for work. I do work for people that I know and that I don't know, right? Like one of my longest standing clients who's amazing, he's in New Zealand. He just messaged me through my portfolio, like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years ago. And we've been working together ever since. And he's like so great. He lets me do whatever I want. He's the best. Like he really respects design. He used to be an artist. I'm like, yes. So he's great, right? So sometimes you have great clients. My advice would essentially be, because I'm a really bad marketer and I feel like I'm not helping you in that area. My advice would be not to take on a lot of bad clients. Like I definitely have had bad clients in my life. I fire my bad clients. You can fire them, by the way. You can say, I don't want to work with you anymore. It's not all up to them, right? So if you don't want to work with them anymore, cut it off and end your contract, or finish your work and end your contract. And then I think that will help in the sense that bad clients are friends with other bad clients, right? Like people that you don't like are friends with other people that you don't like. So if they're a bad client and they don't pay you, or maybe they don't respect you or whatever, who are they going to talk to about you and refer to you? They're other shitty friends, right? So you don't want them to refer their shitty friends to you. So I would say if you can, if you're in a position to do this, take on good clients that respect you, because they will tell other people who they know who are also respectful about you, and you get more clients that way. That's essentially how I've done it. Part of it's luck, so I'm sorry.
I feel like I fall in that same boat because I'm one of those people, like introverted as well. Like I very much do not like talking about myself, especially when I feel like I have to sell myself. I'm like, I don't really feel like I should or have to. But yeah, no, that's amazing advice. And then I guess like, maybe a related question is like, what are some like red flags to kind of like notice if they're going to be a bad client?
Sorry, I drank water. And I went down the wrong pipe. But yeah, bad clients. Okay, number one, I can tell from the email. Maybe I'm like spidey senses now, but I can tell from the email. If you write a message that like grammatically doesn't make sense, not in the sense that you like don't speak English, like that's not what I'm saying, but you can tell when someone wrote stuff that's like weird, right? Like they capitalize words that shouldn't be capitalized. That doesn't necessarily have to do with you like knowing English or not. So when I see stuff like that, that usually indicates there's like something wrong. And like, I don't know why that's the case, but that's usually the connection I find. So like if the email sounds like kind of weird in the way that it's written, if the email sounds unprofessional, in the sense of like sometimes people will be like, how much is it for a website? You didn't tell me anything about your business. You didn't tell me anything about your website. Like it tells me that you don't have a real functioning business and that you're probably looking for something cheap. And that's probably not me, and that you probably won't pay me. So I feel like, yeah, depending on what they say in the email, like they should be giving you like, this is my business, and this is what we're looking to do, and here's why, and we're looking for a designer to help us with that, blah, blah, blah. They should outline some of these things for you in the initial email. They shouldn't just be like, hey, so I'm making a website for this. Like, can you make me a website? Like, that's not an email that you respond to. So I can usually tell right there. Also, make sure you have a contract, by the way. That's like number one, have a contract. If you give them a contract and they freak out or back out, they were crazy and they weren't going to pay you, right? So that's kind of like from the email or a call. If you had an initial call, you can kind of tell what people are like, or if they like don't fully have an understanding of what they want or their business, or sometimes people have a really, like they want you to like be their hands and like just do something for them, but they have the idea in their head. That's also usually not a good sign. So if you're seeing any of that, probably not a good sign. Otherwise, if it all seemed good and then they back out at the contract, you dodged a bullet.
Wow. Okay. So hopefully everyone found that really helpful, because I am kind of glad I don't do much freelance work. Just because sometimes I really want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but that kind of goes awry sometimes. But yeah. Anyway, we actually have a few questions here that I'm going to compile into one question. But do you feel like a student needs to work on a real life project or like with a real client when they're on their capstones? Do you think it's necessary?
I don't think it's necessary, because lots of students don't. They still get jobs. I think in a way it helps, because you can be like, yeah, I had this real world experience working with developers and PMs and like cross-functional teams, and or maybe other designers or something like that. I think that's where that experience becomes important, because a lot of what interviews become when you're more intermediate senior, most of the interview is about how you work with other people, right? So if you have experience working with other people like PMs, developers, etc., that could be valuable, but you don't have to, because lots of people don't, and they're fine. Like when I was in school, all my work was from school, and people still hired me, so it was okay.
This was an interesting one. I think two similar questions came in, but basically they're asking if you have years of previous design work, like in interaction design or just in any other type of design, do you think it's necessary for someone to start over and have to take a UX bootcamp? Or do you think it's just helpful?
I don't think it's necessary. It depends on like how good you are, I guess. Like for example, my friend who used to work with me, I don't know, his sister, I know his sister, she might be here, she might not, I don't know. She was a really great graphic designer. Like she's a really good graphic designer. She took a Designlab course, like a short course. That was enough for her to like have a like good looking portfolio that was like had UX projects in it and things like that. So she was able to do that with that, right? But it depends on where you start, how your work looks, and how much you feel you know, and how comfortable you are with what you know or don't know. So yeah, it really depends on the person. So if you're like unsure and you can afford it, I would say just do it. If you're unsure because you can't afford it, you can always talk to other students at boot camps and things like that and see what their experience was, and if you feel like it's worth it to you.
Yep, totally. And we're going to do two more questions. So this next one I think is really, it's interesting because I was thinking about this earlier. Do you think geography plays an important role in finding a product design job?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. So if you're not in a city, first of all, I think it is harder. You will probably have to be comfortable with working remotely or finding like remote jobs in other cities because you live in a small town or something, right? Or a less populated place. So I feel like that often happens. So yes, that's a part of it. And then a part of it is also what city do you live in, right? So I live in Canada. I live in Toronto. A job in Toronto is different than a job in the Bay, right? There's different kinds of jobs in the Bay. There's more of them. There's also more designers. Even the standard to which they hold you to in the Bay as a designer is higher a lot of the time too. So I think it is like where you are is relevant. It doesn't, but I feel like you can find a job wherever you are. It's just maybe easier or harder depending on what you're looking for.
Yeah, for sure. And for anyone who is from San Diego, I've had this conversation with other San Diegans in the past. Basically, our industries here are primarily biotech and engineering. So I have students who come from smaller towns, and what I usually tell them is when you're in smaller towns with less companies who are maybe looking to explore into the world of having a UX designer, they'll often kind of just want to hire one person because they don't know what they want yet, right? Like they don't really know what they want, what the role can actually do for them, like what the benefit of having UX designer is. So oftentimes you may be asked to be the UX and UI designer, right? The full product designer versus in a larger city like the Bay Area, there are more specialized roles. Like there are companies that understand what UX design does, the process, they understand that there's different phases, they might need different teams. So yeah, I completely agree that location does play somewhat of a factor in terms of the jobs that are available.
Yeah. And what kind of job, the size of the company, things like that. So yeah, I would like, if you are someone who is willing to move for a job, like really ask yourself that and see if it's worth it, depending on the kind of job you want. And if you're not willing to move, like, yeah, you just have to ask yourself that. I think it's possible anywhere. It's just, you just have to ask yourself, what kind of job do you want? Where do you want to work? What experience do you want to have? And figure out if you need to move for that or not.
Do you think in the last year since pandemic has started that more design roles have been popping up as like, yes, we will take you remotely now? Or do you think it's still okay?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, hopefully that gives everyone a little bit more confidence and like I can land a remote job because I know that's usually like a goal for so many of our students.
Yeah, it's definitely more popular now. This is like the only good thing that has come out of this pandemic.
I agree. Okay, last question. And this one I thought was really interesting. Oh man. Oh, I lost it. Oh, okay. Your thoughts on unpaid internships, and do you think they are beneficial, relevant, things that
They are
people should
illegal
consider?
here, so they are illegal to me. That's my thought. If someone, okay, so here in Canada, internships that are unpaid are illegal unless they are for school credit. That's the way I think it should be, right? Like if you're going to school and you need a credit, like I had to do an internship when I went to school. I think that's fine if they don't pay you because you are getting something out of it. You are graduating, right? So like, sure. But that's like the only situation I can accept. If you are doing work, you should be paid for that work. Even if you're paid minimum wage, you should still be paid, right? Like, yeah, I understand maybe they're not going to pay you as much as a full-time salaried employee, but they should be paying you. I would basically consider them an asshole. So that's my take. Maybe it's too Canadian of a take, but like, I don't know.
No, I feel the same way. And at least that, having grown up in California, that was always my understanding of like unpaid internships were really just a thing when you're in college. And that was probably the last time where they can get away with an unpaid internship, and past that, like you have to get paid in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Totally. All right, cool. So this actually wraps us up. This was awesome. Yeah, we definitely didn't. I'm so sorry, everyone. We didn't get to go through all the questions, but I kind of wanted to compile all the really popular ones. But hopefully, Cassandra gave really good insight to, you know, what life is like as a mentor, what her experiences are, what to maybe look out for as you're applying for jobs. But yeah, this was amazing. Thank you again, Cassandra, for being here with me. Seems like everyone is on the Cassandra hype train, so this is amazing.
Yeah, wow.
Love it. I love it so
Wow,
much.
I see so many names that I recognize.
So for anyone who is wondering, this is recorded. This will go up on YouTube like usual. So go ahead and go to our channel, follow us, subscribe, all that fun stuff.
Wow,
But
this is
yeah.
the first time I'm on YouTube. Crazy.
I know. I feel like I'm here. I'm on there too often, which is why I have to
Yeah,
like go
you're
on
just a
vacation every day,
personality.
basically. Awesome. All right, we're gonna end this now. Thank you again for your time. Thank you everyone who's here, and we'll see you all next time.
All right. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.